It's hard work running your own business, right, Jen?
So tough, Kev.
But it doesn't have to be all work and no play.
Why's that?
Because on the Business Full Works plan for iPhone, you get unlimited data so you can work on the go.
That just sounds like work.
Hey, you didn't let me finish. It also includes all the music, games, and TV you could squeeze into your coffee break or when you go and hide in that room where no one can find you.
I don't do that.
Work meets play on the Business Full Works plan for iPhone from EE. Get unlimited data, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, and Apple Arcade.
Terms apply. Coverage and experience may vary by location.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal Concept Show. I'm your host Paul Rook, and as always we are exclusive to the PAUK radio network, and we are joined tonight by Kerry, Greenaway and Richard Clements. Hello guys.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Have you had a good week?
Yeah, very good week. Back to work. Woohoo!
Yeah, it hasn't been too bad, you know. Now I know I can start to venture out a bit further afield. Yeah, things are looking good and the sun's out. And you can't really go wrong when the sun's out, can you? Always cheers everyone up, I think.
Well, yeah, not me because I like it cold.
Well, yeah, you do, don't you?
Yeah, I live in the fridge, by the way, everybody.
He's not joking.
Yeah, so have you been up to much this week?
Well, obviously back to work, so the focus has been on that one. But, you know, the world is opening up again, isn't it? We're now the rule of six, so we can meet up outside and we can start doing some things now a bit more. We feel a bit easier to start doing things. Yeah. And what better to fulfill your ghosty needs than to go on a ghost walk?
Oh, I love ghost walks. I started off doing ghost walks initially.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I know that sort of business very well.
And in an amazingly historic city would be good as well, wouldn't it, guys?
It would. Didn't really have access to many of those without travelling quite a way, but yeah. York would be really good. Yeah,
York is one of my favourite cities. And I actually have been watching an absolutely amazing lady through the lockdown. She's been doing lives on her Facebook page, which is Shadows of York. Her name's Mackenize Crompton, and she's been keeping us entertained. Hello, Mackenzie. How are you?
Hello there. How are you? I'm excellent.
Good. And so you've been doing this through lockdown because obviously this is your trade, isn't it? Doing ghost walks around York.
It is, yes. Yes, unfortunately, it's because of lockdown, people aren't travelling, and we weren't allowed to work. I say we, myself and all the tour guides in doing different things in York and all over the country. We've not been able to go out and do the tours, so I was like, right, we don't get anything from the government really because we don't fall into a particular category until basically January this year, when they finally remembered us, and what they gave us was really poor as well. So we had to work out how to live, basically. And many of us had started doing online talks and doing pay-as-you-feel sort of thing. And so, yeah, I went off initially doing lots of ghost walks around the city centre. But then it was a bit done to death by that point, and other people around York have been doing them as well. So I decided to do some historical stuff, which has gone down really well, and some very funny stuff as well.
Well, it's definitely given me a lift because, as I say, you're in one of my favourite cities in the entire world. I had relatives up there; they've all passed over now, and I remember going up and visiting as a child, and it's one of the. Oh, it's just such a beautiful city. Anybody out there, if you've not visited York, go, because it is just beautiful and packed and racked to the grills of gruesome history, iconic places, and very atmospheric places as well, isn't it, Mackenzie?
Very, very, very much so. Yes, yes. It's you can't move without there being something about a building or about an area. So it's definitely worth a visit. And it's very clean, it's very pretty, and it does have a lot of its character still, whereas a lot of places have been knocked down, sadly, in other areas. So York's definitely kept its character.
Yeah, I sort of found that, you sort of walk down the road and you sort of say, give quite an interesting historical glimpse into one building, then you literally take 2 steps and then you're somewhere else totally, sort of giving some information on another building. I mean, so that's definitely something I will be doing when I come up that way next, because like Kerry said, I'm a great fan of York myself.
And like I said, it's packed full of history. But I want to ask you, first of all, how did you get into this? Because it's quite theatrical, isn't it?
The ghost walk was actually accidental, really. Well, kind of accidental. Basically, I'd worked in varying jobs throughout my life whilst trying to break into the acting world. And I did do a little bit here and there, and done odd shows and stuff. But I then found a calling. I'm going to let you know a little secret, actually. I'm terrified of the dark, and I don't really watch very many horror movies, and other than ghosty things, and I don't like scary stuff. So, yeah. And I remember going to the dungeons years and years and years ago when it really was scary. And it was just me and my friend. There was nobody else there, and it was horrific. I was absolutely terrified, but I loved it at the same time. But yeah, a bit of a cowardly custard on my part. However, one of my friends who was doing a scare attraction in York, he said to me, "You're an actress. You can be quite weird and wonderful. Do you fancy having a go at scare acting?" And I said, "What the hell is that?" He says, "It's actually quite difficult to do, to frighten people, but I think you'd be very good at it." I don't know how he thought that, but and he was my ex-boss, actually, from a job at Virgin, not Virgin, That's Entertainment. It was a DVD shop, and he says, "Right, come on, have an audition." And I went along for an audition. And in the end, I didn't even audition. He just told me about this already creepy house that I'd already walked around, which was called Number 35 Stonegate. It was a very haunted house. I already didn't want to do the job because it was a haunted house. And he says, "Oh, Mackenzie, forget the audition. I'm really stuck for actors and, that can actually do this sort of thing. I think you'll be very good at it. And you're the only person I can think of that will fit this 90. Like, right, thanks for that. Not to do with talent then, just because I'm a shorty, you've picked me, okay. Anyway, I was humming and awing, and he was like, "Please just do the job, you'll be all right. I won't let the ghosts get you." So I ended up doing this scare attraction, and it turned out that actually I can scare the bejesus out of people with storytelling and being generally creepy and stuff. And from then on, I went into scare acting, and I did quite a few bits and pieces around the country, mostly up north. And I then went to work at the York Dungeons itself, believe it or not. And
we've been now.
Yeah, for a short time. And then when I left, there was an advert in the paper for a ghost walk guide. And I thought, oh, that would be quite a good job, casual work, whilst looking for acting work and what have you. So I went and met up with the gentleman who ran this ghost walk, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're very good." And I worked for him, but it was such occasional work. And then it turned out that everything I was telling people, because I wasn't a historian or anything at the time, I was just, bog standard general public, really, didn't know a great deal myself. And but when I was talking to them, I thought, this doesn't sound right. And when I went and researched some of the stories, I was like, this is garbage. And I can't lie. I can't tell people this. It didn't even actually happen like that. The truth was even better.
Yeah.
And then I got messed about quite a lot. And one day, unfortunately, my father was in hospital at the time. And this is a funny story. the guy had told me I was doing a ghost walk that night a few weeks previous, and I said okay. But as typical, he was quite delayed in confirming, and basically I waited all day. I messaged him, I tried to ring him and said, look, is tonight still going ahead? Because at the time I lived quite far away from York, and no response. I thought I'd best just turn up. So I put all my makeup on. I had false contact lenses in and everything else, blood down one side of my face, and I needed to go see my dad in hospital. So I went to hospital in all my regalia, went through the ward, and the nurses looked at me quite, disturbed, not sure whether to give me a bed or not. And I then talked to my dad, and they literally had the tour to start within in the hour. And I finally got a message saying, oh, no, they never confirmed. And I thought, thank you very much. I've wasted my money on makeup, my time, rushing around. These contact lenses is not cheap. Everything else. And then I looked at my father and I said, Dad, what do you think if I actually started my own business, and did this myself? And he just said, if you think you can do it, then do it. So I did.
And you did it better.
I did. But it took a really long time to get going, though, because of competition and advertising. And to be honest with you, when I first started, I didn't have a lot of money. In fact, I was in debt, so I didn't have anything to build a website. So I literally had to learn by myself how to build a website, and I still run it by myself. I then had to obviously go off and learn first aid, get insurance, this, that, and the other. But I eventually started up just doing private walks only. And then about 2 years ago, I started doing the public walk, and it started gradually getting busier. And then before the lockdown, I was a little bit more busy and more known, and TripAdvisor reviews were excellent. I had won, all the certificates on that, which was lovely. And then this happened with the lockdown. So I started doing the online stuff and suddenly got a huge fan base. And I never imagined that it would be like that. I thought I'd just have 10 people watching and that would be it.
Well, it just goes to show, doesn't it? The power of the internet through lockdown has been amazing.
It has,
and hopefully that'll translate once you're actually able to actually see people and do it around the city again.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm hoping so.
Because I have to say, I mean, I'm, doing the job we do, we keep our eye on things and see people coming up. And it takes a lot. There is a skill, isn't there, to being a storyteller, to actually putting across the history and, the not so nice side, but with a bit of humour and a bit of scare. It is a skill, isn't it?
It is. It's not the easiest of things. And I've also learned it's very difficult walking around trying to every now and then look at the camera, tell a story, look at the buildings, not fall over, make sure the camera doesn't fall out of its holder, make sure people can hear you, and avoid, to be honest with you, even though York is a beautiful city, in every city you're always going to get the drunks or the odd ones that are out and about. It's usually the kids, and they like to interfere, which you probably won't see on camera, thank goodness, but my golly, is it quite scary just walking around trying to avoid the living. So it's actually really, really hard walking around on your own in the dark with a camera, avoiding people, whilst trying to tell a story, whilst trying to keep it interesting, whilst trying to remember what you're talking about, because obviously they had to learn new stuff as well, and make it work. So yeah, there is definitely a skill to it.
Not a job that just anybody can do. So when you are doing it for the public, whereabouts do you start in York? Where can people find you for a start? Where's your starting point?
When it's a normal tour, in real life, I start outside I nearly said a hotel. I don't. Well, I do. But it's not quite that. I'll start again. Talking rubbish. Right. I start outside St Michael the Belfry Church, which is a big church right next to the Minster. If you can't find the Minster, you're not in York. That's all I can say. It's really that easy to find. But it is directly opposite a hotel called the Dean Court Hotel, And on on one other side, there's also the Guy Fawkes Inn. So it's really, really, really easy to find. Everybody knows where those places are if you get lost. But don't get confused with the other Ghost Walk guide who starts across the road. So occasionally people do. So, outside the church, in front of the church, that's where you'll find me. Look for the creepy lady, basically. Not difficult to do. Occasionally when there's events on, though, sometimes the church will randomly have gigs outside the front of the church that they don't tell anybody about. So if that happens, I basically contact everybody and say, I'm round the corner.
Oh, right.
York itself does seem to have a plethora of I love that word, of ghost stories. And one of the most famous, I think, that we all know in the paranormal field is the Roman soldiers in the bottom of the treasury in the cellar.
The treasurer's house, yes. It is definitely one of the most famous ghost stories in York. I don't tell it on every single tour, but because I like to change it up. But yes, it's one that when you've heard it, although it's not one of those terrifying, make you lose sleep, but it's so thought provoking that even if you're a skeptic, you have to think, how can I disprove it? And you can't. You can't. That's the beauty of that story, and that's why it's so famous. And also that's why it's so famous in the paranormal world, because obviously our love is to search for the truth about life after death. That is basically what we really want. And his evidence behind it was extraordinary, and that's why we love that story.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Mackenzie. Of all the stories, of all the ghost sort of stories, I mean, that has sort of everything in it, and as you say, it just makes you think, doesn't it? And the guy, and there's still quite a lot sort of written about it online, and it is a great all round story.
I think the guy never changed his story either, did he?
No,
never added to it, never altered it. He just told it as he remembered it. And before he died, when he retired, he actually went to the treasurer's house to tell his story.
Oh, brilliant!
Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So so that you're outside the Minster, and as Mackenzie says, if you can't find the Minster, then you're blind for a start. It is just enormous and beautiful. Have you actually witnessed anything paranormal on your walks at all?
Oh, yes, a couple of odd things, but I think the most favourite has been when I first started out on my own. I went to this church that I'd been to many times before when I worked for the previous guy, and I was stood up on this graveyard, and then sometimes you feel all right there, and other times you don't. But you know yourself when something doesn't feel quite right. And hello, Merlin. Sorry, I've got a cat. I apologise for the meows.
Oh, don't mind. We don't mind the cats.
Cats and kids. I've got kids my end shouting and screaming upstairs, so I apologise for that, everybody. Carry on, Mackenzie.
Right. Oh yes, I was stood in this in front of this graveyard, and funny enough, as I was talking about a story to do with being buried alive and things, a shadow literally floated past me. Now I only caught it with the corner of my eye, and so I jumped, and then it wasn't there, and I thought, oh okay, maybe it was just a fly that had flown literally past my eye. That's what I'd put in my mind. And I was about to apologise to the group because I thought nobody else would have seen that, but they did. Particularly the men, men. No disrespect to you, gents, but in general, gentlemen aren't believers, or they won't admit it. And the whole group of them to take a step back and say to me, "No, we just saw that as well." It was really impressive. And I was like, well, what did it look like? And they said, well, it was like a really tall, dark shadow figure. And it floated right past you, and as soon as you moved, it vanished.
Wow.
Thank you. But I do have a really interesting story on that one. last year, when one of the first tours, actually, when we was allowed back out again, I think it was about June, July. I maybe didn't start until July again, or August. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I had a private tour for 3 ladies, and one of them, she'd never been to York before, and she was from Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And she didn't speak very good English as such. I mean, 'cause she could speak it, but her friends would translate for her, and that's why they wanted a private tour. So I took her around, told them varying stories, and there was one really interesting one. As soon as we got to this little what we call the plague house, before I even told her the story, she was waving at the window, and I was like, "Who are you waving at?" And she was like, "Oh, there's a little girl," and just waving at her. She's waving at me. I was like, "Oh, okay." Well,
is it empty? The plague
it
house?
was empty, yeah, and funny enough, it was the plague house where I talk about a girl that died there. But oh no, the house itself, sorry, is lived in. People do live there, but there was nobody in the window at the time when she was waving. And then we moved on, and by the time we got to that graveyard, and I started telling the story. Oh no, I hadn't started telling the story. Beg your pardon. This lady she was stood at the graveyard and having a random conversation. Obviously, I didn't understand what she was saying, and I looked at her friends, and they said, "Oh, sorry, you don't know, do you? She's a medium, a light worker, but she doesn't do it for money. She just talks to spirit like we talk to each other." And she likes to try and move them on if possible as well. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'll go on then. Humour me who she's talking to," because in my mind, even though they might be mediums and they've never been to York, they could still pick up a book maybe and just learn odd little bits and things. You know, some people are like that. They want to believe they can talk to spirit, and I believe people can talk to spirit, but sometimes I don't know. You get the odd charlatans and stuff. But anyway. I thought, there's no book in the world that will tell you this ghost story, so I'm intrigued to know what she says. And she turned around and she said, "Right, there is a dark shadow figure of a gentleman in there who was a priest in life, and he says he wants to move on, but he can't because he can't find the lady that he wants to apologise to. However, he really likes listening to you, and he says he's really sorry that he frightened you a few years ago."
Wow.
Brilliant.
There's that, "You're real then, aren't you? You really are real." And I went, "White as a sheet." And I said, "Yeah, he's fine. He's okay. He's not going to come back out though, is he?"
Yeah, can you just tell him to stay away and not scare me when I'm in the middle of my stories? He can listen from a distance.
But honestly, sometimes you stand there and sometimes you do get this feeling of something approaching, and I think, "Oh, don't touch me."
I love it. That's brilliant. Oh my God, that's verification though for you that there is life after life.
Yes, it is. I mean, I would like to be able to know more about a family member that passed on, unfortunately, but I do sometimes feel that it's very difficult to find anybody who truly knows. But I do think it's a lot easier when you're in an area where they have died and stuff, and if they are trapped, then they will come and talk to you. So yeah, I do believe in that 100%.
So there's a very famous grave in York, I believe. I could be wrong on this. Dick Turpin's buried in York, isn't he?
That's right. Yes.
So I take it. Have you felt anything around there?
I felt something around there, but whether it's him or not, it could be anybody. I mean, a graveyard is a pretty packed out place, so it's
Yeah, true.
you got to toss it between him and a few. But I will say that particular grave, we don't know if he's actually in that area, because the story is that he got buried. He was then dug up by a surgeon who had him in his back garden, basically. People of York found out about it, stormed his house, grabbed the body, and reburied him in the graveyard. But we think that he was buried in a secret plot so that he wouldn't be dug up again, and that bit with the concrete around it and the stone is just a ruse to sort of stop people digging him up, basically. That's the story. But either way, he is in that graveyard because the records say he's in that graveyard. So,
Right.
but yes, you can go and see the grave memorial, if you will, of Dick Turpin and his alias name, John Palmer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not a nice character, everybody. If you look into him, he's
Yeah.
not the romanticized figure that everybody has a viewpoint on, right?
That's exactly it. He is a nasty, nasty piece of work. You do not want to be involved with Richard Turpin in any way, shape, or form. He's in life. He's murdered. He's beaten people up. He's shot animals and stolen horses and committed highway robberies. He's a nasty man. Very violent.
Of everything around York, you go and you obviously got a lot of stories and you know a lot. Do you have a particular favourite you'd like to sort of share with us?
Oh, it is difficult. There is so many good stories. I'm not sure if I have a favourite anymore. I mean, I really love a ghost story that unfortunately debunked. It's a great ghost story, and I still will tell it sometimes on tours and things.
Right.
But I'm pleased it is debunked because it's not a nice story. But it's basically, in a nutshell, called The Children of Bedon. And allegedly there was a workhouse there, and the beadle there, George Pym, was a nasty, horrible piece of work, who treated the children badly, obviously, as they did get treated badly in workhouses. And when they died, sometimes he'd report their deaths to the church, and other times to save the money, because it's something that would be docked for every charge, you see, he would bury them at random spots on the outskirts of York, still claiming money for them from the church.
Right.
And then eventually, one cold winter, he couldn't bury them because the ground was so solid, and so he kept them in his cupboard.
Wow. Really? Oh, ooh.
And then under the floorboards, and so obviously it would start to stink from the rotting. But the thing is, in Bedon, it was one of the slums of York, so it stank round there anyway. Nobody would really notice. And then one night he thought he could hear the children talking to him and screaming and whispering and giggling, and so he kept checking the bodies over and came to this conclusion that it was not them. He wouldn't believe that it was their ghosts. He thought it was the children in the workhouse playing a game with him, a mind game or a prank. And so in his madness, he went around the workhouse and butchered every child.
Ooh, nice man.
Yeah. Yes.
You can't verify that with a historical record at all?
No, there is no news. This is not something they would have covered up, and it would have been impossible to do so. There's no news article. There has never been a workhouse in that area. There has been schools, but they were quite well-to-do. It was St. Peter's School, actually, which belonged to the Minster, and it wasn't in that time frame either. But what was there was the slums of York. So a lot of people would have died there, children included, sadly. But the only thing I have discovered is, because I've walked around there and I've actually personally had my hand grabbed by a small child, but there was nobody there. And people on tour have as well. Some people have even, before they've heard the story, they walk around. And so I can see a little boy running around. And I'm like, really? There's nobody here. But I accidentally found out something just a few weeks ago about that area, and that a little boy and his mates were messing about. And this little lad, now what was he called? Not the actor, by the way, but he was called George. And actor, is it an actor? Yeah. He was only 8 years old. And he was really winding up this other boy who was 13 years old, and I think he was called William. And so William picked him up, threw him on the floor. This is true. Threw him on the floor, and he smacked his head on the cobbles. So he went home crying, obviously, complained to his mum of a severe headache. So his mother took him to the chemist, who then said to her, "You need to take him to the hospital." And the hospital at the time is where the Sainsbury's is on Foss Island. There's a red building right behind it, and that was the original York Hospital, if you will. So she took him there, and he died that night from his head injuries.
Oh.
Oh, gosh.
But little boy, 8 years old, screaming, whispering, playing with his friends. It all kind of fits with the ghosts that have been reported round. And some people do get a bit of a headache every now and then. Thankfully, I have never had the headache. And they do have the pockets pulled and tugged at and the hands pulled and tugged at. So that kind of fits.
So how much work do you have to do yourself, like to get the historical facts? Are you having to pile through like the records office in York and, really get to the nitty gritty of that?
You get to gritty. There's some books out there, some of which can be incorrect. So you take a little bit of information from each and then kind of go away and research it online on the records and things. We haven't got access to the records in the library at the moment because the library's closed. Unless you know exactly what you're looking for, you can order it. But yeah, so I've got a lot of friends though who are historians who know quite a lot about York, or they've been archaeologists in York, and they've told me bits and pieces. And if they don't know, nobody does, basically. So yes, it take a lot of work to go and read everything. Particularly as I'm a little bit dyslexic as well, so it takes me forever, and it's a bit causes a headache. And to go out and find these facts, but every now and then I do have to update it because sometimes you find something and it turns out to just be made up by somebody and you discover more about it. So you have to alter it again. But to date, everything I know is fact.
So with all the stories you've collected and you obviously got stored in, is there any one particular period of time that stands out? Are there more sort of Elizabethan ghosts, do you feel, in York, or Victorian?
Definitely Victorian, because the Victorians lived in absolute squalor in York, unfortunately. It was a lot of poor areas, so there's a lot of death. But I also think that there could be a lot of medieval ghosts because of the unfortunately the deaths and the invasions that we've had. Too many invasions. So yeah, I'd definitely say medieval and Victorian ghost stories. And a lot of that is because that's what people have seen so far. I reckon if we could dig further down into York, you'd see further back, like the Roman soldiers, for example, because York is literally built on top of itself. So, for example, if you go into the gardens, the museum gardens, when they allow you into a particular area of the gardens, you can actually see the different levels in the soil. So it goes from the Roman times to William the Conqueror to Tudors, Stuarts, and all the way up to now, basically. And it was explained to me as well as the ground sinking naturally. When we built things, we kind of just pulled it down and built on top of it, basically. So that's why there's so many levels, because we just kept building on top of and on top of and on top of things. This is why we have such deep cellars in some parts of York. And I've been in some pub cellars, like for example, the Artful Dodger, which is on Micklegate, just the end of Micklegate. It's the world's tiniest pub, and yet the cellar extends out all underground around that area.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, my word.
So there is sort of like stories of sort of lots of sort of tunnels under York then as well.
Oh yeah. Yes, there will have been certain tunnels. How they linked up, if at all, we don't know. Many of them are filled in now for safety and or just blocked off for access, and some of them are blocked off because they don't want you to get to near the graveyards where there's been varying diseases buried. So there's a lot we can't go to.
As you were saying, I mean, and if you can't see the Minster, you're not in York. I mean, what sort of stories are generated around that area? And is it a very active area, would you say?
No, on the outside of the Minster, round the front of it, I would say, is very, very quiet. There's not an awful lot going on, ghosty-wise. But when you go round the back of it, that's where the treasurer's house is. And people have seen workmen. When I say workmen, I mean people dressed in white, and people think, oh, a baker. Why is there a baker? But when you look at the history and the outfit, that was the similar outfit that they wore when they were building or renovating the Minster in a certain time frame. And I can't remember, something like let's say the Victorian period, for example. So later history. And there is a ghost story out there where there was a woman admiring the Minster, and a guy came up to her dressed in this cap and a white apron and things, and he says, "Do you like that? I did that." And he vanished. But one of my friends, she doesn't know if she believes in ghosts or not, but she worked as a security guard at the Minster, because the Minster has its own security. And I think it's the only cathedral in the country that does, apart from maybe, like Westminster or something. But, and she worked there, and she'd never seen anything, but she'd heard stories from other staff members, like lights turning on by themselves and stuff like that. And she says, but otherwise it's really peaceful. She says, but one day when I was walking to work and going, and this is at the back of the Minster that I was talking about, she says, I saw this guy dressed in white, and he was walking around, and I went, oh, hello. And I thought, oh, he must have gone around the corner, I can't see him. Anyway, she couldn't find him. So she came in to check out the CCTV, and her friends were watching her on CCTV saying, what were you looking at? She says, well, I saw this bloke and I had to go and investigate him. But I couldn't find him. She says, well, we could see you looking, but we couldn't see anybody on the camera.
Wow.
And he was obviously as real as her.
As real. Yeah, he didn't look like a ghostly apparition. No. And some ghosts don't. They truly are as solid as you and I. And this is why they say, ghost people die every day. They're not all just old ghost stories. They could be modern. And when you're walking down the street, how do you know you've not walked past several dead people?
Yeah, there's always that sort of theory around that. I mean, the apparition I saw, or believe I've seen, that was as solid as day, and you could have just mistaken it for, well, in fact, I did. It wasn't until I revisited it in my thoughts a couple of years later, I thought, hang on a minute, there was something not quite right, but apart from that, no, it was as solid as you and me.
Well, quick off the mark there, weren't you, Richard?
Oh, yes.
No flies on you.
So York is home to one of the oldest streets in the UK. It's called the Shambles. It's world famous, isn't it? And literally, you only got to put your arms out either side of you, and you can touch the walls. It sort of leans over at the top as well.
Yes. It was deliberately built like that, so that it was deliberately built slanted, so that because it was a butcher's street, so that the blood and guts and things could ooze down the street to the bottom, and then they could clean it out, I suppose. And then they were built deliberately close together so that the sun wouldn't shine down and spoil the meat, and keep the street cool, and hopefully try and keep the rain off the windows a little bit where they would hang the meat. So in summer, it's the ideal place to stand, except for there's hundreds of people around you, so you're still going to get warm from them, unfortunately. But that's why it looks the way it does.
Oh, I thought that was just time that had sort of made it lean.
No, it's not leaned over with time. If you look at it again, it doesn't really lean. The upper floors have been built deliberately wider than the lower floors, and you'll have to have a look at that when you see it next.
Oh, well.
Yeah, they sort of overlap, I think.
Yeah. And plus, it's quite deceptive because it goes up a slight hill as well, doesn't it? So, and it's, so I suppose that's where you're getting a bit confused, Kerry.
Well, I knew it was butchers because some of the shops they've still got the original hooks.
Yes, they have. Yeah.
Outside, on the window frames and that, you can see that. I honestly believed it was like not a I suppose a subsidence thing more than anything else. Oh, see, you learn something new every day.
Well, there you go.
There's a little museum around there as well that does there's like witchcrafty stuff inside.
Oh, it's not a museum. It's a Hogwarts, not Hogwarts, a Harry Potter shop.
Oh, there you go, Paul.
Oh no, there's one.
Yeah.
There is like a little museum up there because I've been in it, and they've got like little displays for schools and things to come in, and they talk about witchcraft and things like that in there.
I think you're thinking of Barley Hall. It's the big house, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's not on the Shambles. It's away from the Shambles.
Yeah, it's just off to one
Yeah.
side sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a couple of streets.
Within walking distance, anyway.
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
Everywhere
it's
in
definitely
within walking distance.
it's rather small. Everything is walking distance. Yeah.
I'm glad though that Paul brought the witch factor up because there is a story, and again, put me if I'm wrong, Mackenzie. Isn't one of the bridges where they pressed a witch on? I think it's up by Castle Museum Way.
No. She wasn't being pressed for being a witch. She was being pressed. We didn't have witches really in York. We executed a couple of them, but they came from other areas. Like, for example, we executed a famous witch called Mary Bateman. But she hadn't really been a witch. She was a fraud witch, and she basically killed somebody and attempted to kill somebody else with these so-called magical potions, but she was just robbing them blind, and she got executed at outside the castle museum. It wasn't a museum back then; it was the castle prison. But yeah, that's where she was executed. But the woman who was pressed to death, she was called Margaret Clifford, who has the shrine on the Shambles. So it's nothing to do with witchcraft, but she was a Catholic, and Catholicism was almost outlawed during the times of Elizabeth I. She was trying to be firm but fair, but you had to go to church and you couldn't harbour priests and things like that. So you basically couldn't really hold mass in your house and things like that. That wasn't allowed. So she used to spend a lot of time in prison because she'd be caught holding mass at her house. So they did try to be firm but fair with her by putting her in prison and making her pay fines. And there is actually a record in the Bar Convent of her husband paying a fine to release her from prison. So it's true. But then one day she was caught hiding Catholic priests. Now that was the big no-no. And so there's two variations of this story. One is that she was just outright executed, and the other one is that she was executed as a result of torture. Either way, she was pressed to death out on Ouse Bridge, and Ouse Bridge is sort of near the Castle Museum. But you'll see a little plaque on the side there, and many people witnessed it and recorded it and said that she lasted about 15 minutes from start to finish. So it's quite horrific, really, but she died for her religion, and she died for her family, basically. And one of the people who witnessed her execution as a 15-year-old or 16-year-old was Guy Fawkes, because he lived in York.
All right.
And started him off on his little crusades.
Excellent. For those of people that don't know, when you say pressed, do you literally mean that they just sandwich them in something and just squeeze the life out of them or something?
Yeah, like a toasty. No, they there will be things like that, I'm sure, in other countries. I've seen them, but no, what they did was they laid you down on the floor with a rock lodged in your spine, and they then placed a door or some form of flat wood on top of you, and then started to add weights to you, weights and rocks and things like that.
Right, okay.
And basically crush you to death. So your spine would split or break on the rock beneath you, and all your internal organs would be crushed. Your ribs would break. You basically just got mangled to death.
Yeah. So they really meant it then.
Oh, aye, they mean business when they're killing you that way. Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there is also, you've mentioned it already, the prison, the famous prison that's in York, which is the Castle Museum now.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
When you go in there, they have actually got a street that's set up as like an oldie worldy street with the candlestick maker and the baker and
Oh, yeah.
and they've also got some of the original prison cells still, haven't they, set up?
Oh, yes, it's still the original prison cells. I mean, they've been knocked about throughout their history and moved around a little bit, and you can tell where they've been moved in its time when it's been a prison. But yes, they are still original with the original doors and everything. Yes, yes.
Can you paranormal investigate there?
You can if you pay, but I think it's exclusive rights to Most Haunted at the moment.
Oh, God, they get everywhere, Most Haunted, don't they? No,
Sounds about right, doesn't it?
There is.
The thing is,
Sorry, carry on.
Sorry, I was going to say I've worked there, and I've sat in the prison cell where Dick Turpin used to hide out. That definitely has more of an atmosphere to it than his grave. And the prison cells definitely are haunted and have a bit of activity, as does some other areas in the museum. But to be honest with you, despite its horrific history, it's really peaceful. It's really, and I think that's down to the happiness of the people going through it and the people that work there, and just kind of being jolly souls, really. But that's my theory. But otherwise, it can be quite scary at times, without a doubt. And we've got some odd stories of things that have happened there. But otherwise, when you go for a paranormal event there, it's not always, in my opinion, very active. So it's not probably the most active place to go to.
Of all the places in York, what would you say was the most active that you would advise an investigator to go to?
Unfortunately, you can't go to it anymore because it's now a shop, and it's called Oliver Bonas or Bonas. I can never say it. They're like a chain shop, and you get them popping up every now and again in different cities. But they've got one in York now, and it's at number 35 Stonegate. And before it became this shop, it used to be called Haunted, and it was a haunted house attraction. But there was no actors and no gimmicks as such. It was just a house that you walked around, and a radio would come on automatically and tell you the ghost story. Now, you can actually access this online on YouTube, so you can actually listen and watch the house as it was in all its glory with videos that people have posted. But I've been on a couple of ghost hunts there, and that was where I did my first ever scare attraction, and that was the place that I really didn't want to be in. I've had my hair pulled, I've been jabbed, or people have been jabbed in the ribs. I've actually seen things in there. And funny enough, sometimes when I tell a ghost story about Stonegate, odd people at the end of the tour come to me and say, I'm really pleased you told me that, because I went to that shop today and this happened to me and that happened to me. And there's always something going on in that shop. They can't keep the staff. And they've all had stories to tell. One of my friends was a full-fledged skeptic. Black with white, you could not convince her any other way. When she went to work there, and I didn't even know she was working there until about a year later, when I spotted her behind the counter one day, I was like, hey, up, Paul, maybe you can tell me something. And she says, oh, yes, my break's coming up soon. I'll tell you all about it. And she told me loads of stories and had things thrown at her. Things have been smashed up before our very eyes. It's quite active. And she recently, when I say recently, last year, she contacted me and she said, who do I go to learn about mediumship? So she's been really converted. There you go. That is the hat to go to. But you can't go and do an investigation there anymore because it's Oliver Bonus obviously not going to allow it with all the shop stuff. So, yeah.
Oh, gosh. So why do you think that one's particularly active?
Don't know. It just, I think the guy who owned it was a gentleman called Jonathan Kaner. He's since passed on. and he was the local astrologer, if you will, for the newspaper and things. And him and Uri Geller bought this house with the idea of making it into a psychic museum. And obviously they did some renovations, because those kind of buildings in York require looking after, and they need lots of money throwing at them to keep them standing. And so they were doing some renovations, and in the process, it was the typical thing. They'd done some renovations and woke up whatever was there. And it started interfering with the museum, and I don't think the museum did very well. It was just a nice idea, but probably wasn't as profitable. But then they had this idea of, well, why don't we just make it what it is, a haunted house attraction? And it was a haunted house attraction for about 10 years, I think. But unfortunately, Jonathan Kaner couldn't afford to look after the house anymore, and so he sold it. But when he sold it, he to get rid of the ghosts, apparently. So that was in the contract. You can read that one online as well as the newspaper. And I went to the manageress, because I got to know her quite well, and I said, Rachel, didn't you all try to get rid of the ghosts in the first place so they could continue with the museum, and gave up because you couldn't get rid of the ghosts? So, oh yeah, we've burned sage, we've done everything here. They don't go. They don't want to go. We aren't going to get rid of them. We just tell people we've got rid of them.
And they soon learn that they didn't.
That's the way to do it.
Well, if they don't want to shift, they're not going to shift. So I'm sorry, you can do all that you want, burning sage and getting priests in and stuff. But yeah.
So, Mackenzie, when are you actually able to restart your public events and your private tours of York?
I am going to start myself for the public walk in May. Technically, I could start sooner, but it's only up to 6 if I start sooner. So I will be able to do private bookings from the middle of April. But I'm just leaving it to May, really, so that I can have a break, because I've been really busy with the online stuff. And I'd rather, like everybody else, would like to see somebody. And just enjoy what York has to offer before I start work again. And also, it was a year ago that, unfortunately, I lost somebody to COVID. So I want to get past that before I start talking about dead people again. And then I'll start up. So the last week of May, I've got tickets available for Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Most Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays, all the way up until the end of August. I haven't opened up bookings for September, October yet. I tend to wait and see what's happening.
And if people are planning to visit York and would like to book a tour with you, where can they find you?
They can find me on TripAdvisor and on the website. The website will probably redirect them to TripAdvisor anyway, because at the moment that's my only ticket format that I trust that will actually refund you in case of lockdowns. So yeah, just go to www.shadowsofyork.co.uk and you'll be able to get your tickets there.
And in the meantime, are you going to continue your online?
In the meantime, between now and the future, yes, I will do some stuff online. The plan is, and it always has been for the last couple of years, but I never got a chance to really, is to travel out to other areas and maybe just not really plan it, because I don't think I could plan how busy it'll be in a different area and stuff. But if I'm somewhere like, say for example, we'll say Edinburgh, and I'm walking around and I might go, oh well, this is this and this is this and this is this. Oh, I could do a quick live. So I might do a quick random live and say, oh, I've just learned this and I thought I would share it with you. That's the plan. And then I can get around varying parts of the country and just pop up every now and again and say, right, this is this and this is that. That's the plan.
So guys out there, if you want to contact or watch Mackenzie's work that she's done online through the lockdown, they're all on her Facebook page, which is Shadows of York. I seriously advise you to go over and check this lady's work out, because she is absolutely a brilliant storyteller. And you can view all her past videos and stuff like that. Are they on YouTube as well, Mackenzie?
There's some of them that were decent enough quality to watch on YouTube. Yes, I've put some on YouTube. but the rest of them are on Facebook. So there's about, I don't know, 15 different videos or something daft like that. It's quite a lot of videos now.
Yeah, it's a stock, isn't it, now?
So yeah, there's quite a lot. So just scroll through them and watch them at your leisure. In fact, if you watch them from the very beginning, you'll probably get that there's a pattern, and it kind of goes from the past to the present.
So, guys, go check Shadows of York out and definitely do a ghost walk whilst you're in York. It is fascinating and thrilling and atmospheric. And it's just a beautiful city. Even better to walk around at night is all I'm going to say. I've done one in York years ago. That was. Scared the life out of my children. They were maybe a bit too young for it, but at the time I loved it.
Yes, I must confess, on my tours, I will not make it nicer for children. That's why I do put an advisory on the tickets and saying not for under sevens. Not really. I mean, I have had 4-year-olds come on tour and they've loved it, and other ones have been bored because they don't know what you're saying, really, and other ones have been absolutely terrified. So they've had to go at the first story or the second story, and the parents have taken them away, bless them. But otherwise, come along. It's not super, in my opinion, it's not super scary. It depends on the individual, because I'm just telling stories. I don't have actors that jump out at you or anything like that, and it's all historical based. But if you really do think about what I am telling you, then it becomes incredibly scary. So it's down to the individual, really.
And that's the kind I like, not the actor ones that get you jump out and all that. No. I want to know the ghost stories. And if that's what you're after, then check Mackenzie's work out, because she's just brilliant at doing what she does. So thank you so much for joining us on the Paranormal Concept Show. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. Honestly, I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, we can say exactly the same back to you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I will be catching up with you when you're doing your lives, and I'm sure I'll be in the chat room for you, because I love your work. Share it to our page all the time. It's been great watching you through lockdown. Now, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back from the break, we're actually going to be joined by another Ghost Walk specialist, somebody who's well known to the PA UK network. Isn't that right, Paul?
It is, yeah, absolutely. Known you for a while now.
Yeah, the lovely Mr. Simon Entwistle. So join us right after this.
Hello, Harry Price here. If there's nothing me and my friends enjoy more here on the other side, it is to sit back and relax and listen to the Paranormal Concept Show, right here on the PA UK radio network. Broadcasting a plethora of interesting and informative content for all your paranormal needs. Find them across social media to keep up to date with forthcoming shows and all their other adventures. Hello, is there anybody there?
And welcome back to the Paranormal Concept Show, exclusive to the Paranormal UK radio network. Now, before the break, we had the lovely Mackenize Crompton on from Shadows of York, talking all about York City and the ghost walks that she does and experiences she's had and all that. Now, we've got another one for you. Now, this guy is no stranger to PA UK. You'll know him from one of the podcasts that we do. And it is Mr. Simon Entwistle. Good evening, Simon. How are you?
Very well, thanks, Kerry. Pleasure to be with you once again.
Yeah, it's amazing to have you on. And so I love your voice. I can listen to you for hours telling your stories. And you've been very busy during lockdown as well, doing live streams and stories and ghosty tales by candlelight and all that sort of stuff, haven't you?
I've really enjoyed it, but I'm not very much a technical person, Kerry. What I found a little bit confusing with the live streams is, you know, when you reverse the picture to look forward, then reverse it back to look at yourself, sometimes I'm all fingers and thumbs and miss it, and you can make a bit of a cock up with the live streams. But so I tend to just have the one camera on me, really, which can take away the stress of all that, really.
You're not alone there with tech.
No, you're not alone. I stand in admiration of people that are tech savvy, because it is just, It is. It's like, which button do you press? You know what I mean?
Yeah. However, Mackenzie's rather good at that. I've seen her live streams in York, and she's very good at technical things, really, I find.
Yeah, we was talking to her, and she was like awful at it. She was going, "Oh, it's been awful." It's funny, isn't it, how you learn to evolve in the circumstance, and how, you know, you can still be out there. Thank God for the internet, is all I can say.
Yes, yeah, I agree.
So you've run Top Hat tours, and you've been doing this for quite a long time now, haven't you?
Yes, I started in 1996, really as a way of subsidising my wages. I, at the time, worked for the local authority. I had 3 children and a mortgage, and I started the Ghost Walks, strange enough, through going to York, actually, and going on a York guided tour with a chap called Tony Mercer. And I got bitten by the bug, really. And so I started in Clitheroe. I then branched out into nearby Blackburn, then up to Kendal in the Lake District, and then over to Skipton and places like South Lakes. And I've, you know, over the years, gathered a lot of information, lots of stories, but I do find that the best way to conduct any tour is not to read about stories, but to meet local people. And I absolutely love the eyewitness ghost stories. They're my favourites, really.
Very much so. It's those first-hand accounts, like we call them the alpha case, people that have actually experienced something, is totally different, isn't it, to what you read in a book, or, you know, the historical research that you can do to try and back up the story or whatever. But it's that story, is it, when someone's telling you and you're thinking, oh my God. But we were saying there is definitely a skill to being a storyteller, and it's a skill that's being lost, do you think?
Yes, I do, really. But I think as a good storyteller, the whole idea is to paint a picture in your imagination. And I find that radio is by far the best way of doing it, really. You can tune into any radio play on the good old BBC, and they will take you to a different place, whether it's the Archers or whether it's a play for today or a book at bedtime. And the whole idea of storytelling, of course, is to paint that picture in the imagination.
Oh, I totally agree with that. It's definitely when you get that trigger in your mind. Now, one of the most famous ones that you do is to do with the Pendle Witch. You've just done a little series for Ghosts of Britain,
Yes.
outlining this, haven't you? Now, what fascinates you so much about the Pendle Witch story?
Right, well, first of all, Kerry, I was born in the town of Colne, which is a small town at the foot of Pendle Hill. My grandmother told me all about the Pendle Witches, and my mother did as well. And they told me that through their bloodline, they were directly related to one of the most famous of all those Pendle Witches, a lady called Alice Nutter. And I thought at first, oh no, it can't be, but they really did trace their bloodline back to that side of the family. And I suppose really, because of that link, it makes the story quite important to me, really. But it is one of the most famous witch trials in British history. And if you were to get, shall I say, 10 really good stories to get the imagination going, I would put the Pendle Witches up there with Jack the Ripper, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, it is sort of, it does have all the elements in it, doesn't it? Yeah, sort of from start to finish. I mean, it is a fascinating story.
Very much so. Why Steven Spielberg has never made a film, I don't know, because it would be a huge box office hit. And what is quite unique about the Pendle region is it hasn't really changed. We've still got Lancaster City Castle, of course. We've got the Well Tower where the Pendle Witches were held. There's Salisbury Hall, which is very nearby. You've got the home of Jeanette Preston, which is still standing. And indeed the home of Alice Nutter, which is still standing. And with a little bit of Hollywood imagination and skills, they could make a blockbuster by using the area and using those buildings, of course.
They could. Maybe that's sort of the scene. They're going to set the scene at Hocus Pocus 2.
Yes.
It definitely would be a good place for it, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, certainly an atmospheric land, yeah.
Well, we talked about York being a very atmospheric city, but the landscape of where the Pendle Witches are, that whole area is very atmospheric in its own right. It definitely has a vibe to it, even when you're viewing it like through a screen or something and you're watching it unfold in front of you. And it puts you in that place, doesn't it? It's not just the story, it's that whole vibe around it when you're watching it or when you're visiting it and having a tour or something like that. It is a very, I don't know, it hits our psyche, that period of history, I think, as well.
Very much so, Kerry. When I take my tours into the Pendle region, they consist of, shall I say, minibus coaches, or in some cases a 50-seater coach, which is rather awkward getting into some of the smaller villages. But I've heard many, many people on board describe what you've just said by saying that Pendle Hill and the area is hypnotic, seductive, and very, very atmospheric. Pendle Hill is only 28 feet below being classed as a mountain, but way back in the year 1612, surrounding the whole hill would have been a huge deciduous forest stretching some 50 miles right round the whole of the Pendle region. And living deep within that forest were a group of people that just wished to live away from society. And at that time, of course, we had a king on the throne of England called King James VI of Scotland, who then became King James I of England. And this man was absolutely paranoid about witchcraft. He not only believed that witches existed, he believed they were actually out to get him. He blamed witchcraft and Catholicism as the same thing. The gunpowder plot of 1605, he blamed not only in Catholicism, but witchcraft. He blamed the fact his wife, Anne of Denmark, couldn't get from Denmark to Scotland to marry him on witchcraft. And on becoming King of England, in 1603, he wrote a book called The Demonology Book. And you can buy that book today from any leading bookshop. And as you pick it up, first chapter, how to find a witch, how to try a witch, and most importantly, how to eradicate a witch. Throughout the whole length of Great Britain, the Forest of Pendle was going to be the main focus of one of the biggest witch trials in British history. And the story really revolves around two very, very elderly ladies of the name of Elizabeth Southern and Anne Whittle. Both women were over 85 years old, and life expectancy in 1612 would be 35 if you were lucky. These two women had somehow defied the laws of nature. Many historians believe that they lived for so long because they knew all about plants, and of course all modern medicines come from plants, and these ladies have been described as being herbalists. What makes their story quite unique is Elizabeth Southern and Anne Whittle actually hated each other with a vengeance. They hated each other because they were both involved in the same trade, which was making herbal remedies in the summer. But in the winter months, they would have to literally beg. And it was to their advantage to let people know that they were indeed witches, so that when travellers came from the Forest of Pendle, they would cough up straight away, really. But our story really starts way back on the 18th of March, 1612, deep in the Forest of Pendle, at a place called Malkin Tower, which was indeed a one-roomed limestone hovel. Living in that hovel was indeed Elizabeth Southern, 85 years old. Her daughter, Elizabeth Devise, 47 years old, and her three children, James, Alison, and Jeanette Devise. Alison Devise left Malkin Tower on the 18th of March and had a walk through the Forest of Pendle, and had the misfortune, and it really was misfortune, of meeting a Halifax peddler. When I say peddler, this man was called John Law. He came from the city of Halifax in West Yorkshire. He had a large pack in his back full of 1612 luxuries. He would go from village to village selling his wares. He had the misfortune of meeting young Alison. Alison begged of him, "Oh, please, sir, you can spare a few pence to pin me clothing together, sir. Get away with you. I'm not taking me pack off of you, lass. You've got no money. You're no use to me. Please, sir, just a few pins, sir. You can spare some pins. Get away with you," shouted Law. According to John Law, the Halifax peddler, out of the Forest of Pendle, out of the bracken, out of the heather, appeared a huge black dog with snarling white teeth and glowing red eyes, and the dog sat next to Alison. The dog turned to look at Alison, and the dog talked. "Alison, I can lame him for you." "Lame him! Lame him!" she screamed. Law felt this terrible pain down his left arm and left leg, left-hand side of his face, and collapsed in agony beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill. He lay there for a good 5 hours. The kind people of the town of Colne could see him. They got a stretcher team together, and they carried him down the forest pathways beneath the shadow of Pendle Hill into an old alehouse called the Greyhound Inn, which is long since gone. The landlord, Jonathan Edrington, spoon-fed Law. He cleaned him, and as Law's voice returned, he shouted, "I've been cursed! There's a witch in the forest, a young lass with a dog. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's in league with devil. Send letters back to me family." John Edrington, the landlord of the Greyhound Inn, sent letters back to Halifax, the Law household, and John Law's eldest son, Abraham, received the first letter. "Here, me father's in trouble. Better go and collect him." He set off from Halifax, arrived in Colne, walked into the old Greyhound Inn, and saw his father in a twisted and contorted state. "Father, what's happened to you, man? You look terrible." "Abraham, I've been cursed. There's a witch in the forest. A young lass has got a dog. I swear to you, I heard the dog talk. She's at league with devil. She's cursed me, lad. I want you to go and find her, bring her here. Get her to reverse the curse." Abraham must have been quite a brave lad. He walked deep into the forest of Pendle through the twisting pathways through deciduous forests and came across this little cottage with smoke billowing from a chimney on the top of it. He hammered on the door. The door opened, and there was Alison Devise. "Can I help you, sir?" "I want to see Alison Devise." "That's me, sir." "Right, lass, you're coming with me." Against her wishes, she was dragged through the forest of Pendle, down into the town of Colne, and into the old Greyhound Inn, where she made eye contact with John Law, the Halifax peddler. Law looked up from his sick bed and shouted, "It's you! It's you! You're witch! You cursed me last, didn't you, that dog you had? I heard it talk." This 14-year-old girl, on bended knees, begged and begged forgiveness. And strange enough, John Law, the Halifax peddler, was about to forgive her when his son Abraham intervened. "Oh, no, we'll have you for this. I'm going to go and get magistrate." And in doing so, he opened the 1612 Pendle Witch trials.
Oh my God, it makes me want to go right now, is all I can say, and hear the rest of the song. Oh my God, you just know it so well, don't you? How many times have you done this talk?
Oh gosh, Kerry, I never get tired of it. You know, tourism is a great profession to belong to, and there's nothing I like more than meeting a minibus with people from all over the country, and in some cases abroad, and take them to these areas, and we stop at each village, and I will give a part of this section of the story, and in some cases we'll then have lunch and then go straight to Lancaster, and we'll visit the actual well tower these poor people were held, and we'll visit the courtrooms, and then I'll leave people to have their own assumptions, to make their own decisions as to whether these people were witches or whether they were indeed falsely accused. The only window we have, Kerry, is a book written in 1613 called The Wonderful Discovery of Witches in Lancashire by a gentleman called Thomas Potts, and that book earned him a fortune.
I can imagine it did, because like you say, there was such a thing, isn't there, about the witch thing, and it exploded. We've got that book itself, the demonology book that you spoke about that James wrote, set off Witchfinder General in Essex, which is where I'm come from.
Yeah.
Myself and Richard.
Mr. Hopkins.
Yes, the notorious Hopkins.
His work, actually, yes.
Yes, he's an enigmatic character in his own right. That's a completely different show, everybody. No doubt we'll visit that again at some point. But back to Pendle. This whole, you know, when you see Pendle, there's a lot of like derelict, like crofts, isn't there?
Very much so. It was very, very isolated in 1612. It was away from society. But we mentioned the king, Kerry. He was an ardent Protestant. He hated the Catholics with a vengeance. And to this very, very day, Burnley, Blackburn, Preston. They all have large Catholic colleges, and the area is still predominantly Catholic. So the king gave orders to all of his magistrates to watch out for illegal Catholic gatherings in Lancashire. Of course, the local magistrate for the area looking after the Pendle region was called Roger Nowell. He had his book of demonology, and he was only aware that if he could incriminate any witches, he was going to curry favour with the King of England. Now, news filtered to him at his home at a place called Reed, the village of Reed near Burnley, Reed Hall. He heard about John Law's son Abraham, who came to see him and told him all about how his father had been cursed. And as a result, Roger Nowell, the local magistrate, gave orders that Alison Device should be arrested. She was brought to Reed Hall, Burnley, where she burst into tears and begged and begged and begged forgiveness for laming John Law, the Halifax peddler. But she gave Roger Nowell a lot more information. My grandmother, she's a witch. So's Ann Whittle from Newchurch in Pendle and her daughter Anne Redfern. Sir, we have familiars. Familiars, said Roger Nowell. Yes, sir, dogs. Tib, Ball, Fancy, Dandy. These dogs, sir, came to us at different times of our lives, sir, and they talked to us, sir. They said, look, we can give you special powers, but in return, we need to suckle from your flesh and take your souls. We also, sir, make clay pictures. Clay pictures, said Roger Nowell. Yes, sir, a doll made of clay, sir, but with human hair and human teeth, which we've taken from corpses interned at Newchurch Cemetery, sir. We select a victim, sir. We then crumble the clay picture over the fire, sir, and people die, sir. Well, Roger Nowell was actually not frightened. He was delighted. He actually had a confession. So therefore he gave orders that Elizabeth Southern, Anne Whittle and Anne Redfern should be arrested. They were brought to Reed Hall, Burnley, where they saw young Alison Device. And this huge argument erupted amongst the four of them. Now remember, Anne Whittle and Elizabeth Southern, these two very elderly women, hated each other. So therefore they tried to blame each other. Young Alison blamed them all, and Anne Redfern, the daughter of Anne Whittle, she also blamed them all. But in doing so, the four of them actually admitted to witchcraft, and they actually admitted to grave robbery. They admitted to making the clay pictures. They self-incriminated each other by trying to blame each other. The four of them were then sent straight to the city of Lancaster, where they were thrown into what we call the Well Tower at Lancaster City Castle, which is still there to this very day. It's a very, very deep underground dungeon. I take groups there on a regular basis, and as you walk down the staircase, you go into a deep, deep abyss. There they were chained to the floor in absolutely appalling situations, with lying in their own waste in total darkness. In the meantime, back at the little stone cottage, Malkin Tower, Elizabeth Device was very worried about her mother, Elizabeth Southern. She was very worried about her daughter, Alison Device, and she organised on Good Friday, 1612, at Malkin Tower, what has gone down in history as the Good Friday meeting, where all these other so-called witches met. It was like a scene from a Shakespeare play, as Alison's brother James slaughtered the sheep from the fell, and they dined on fresh mutton. They got a large cooking vessel called a cauldron, and lit a fire beneath the cauldron, and the black syrupy liquid inside began to bubble and steam. And into that black bubbling liquid went crushed, powdered human teeth, the odd clay pitcher, and indeed the odd human scalp. The whole idea, apparently, was to get a potion together to blow the gates of Lancaster City Castle open and rescue their loved ones. However, nothing happened. What did happen is word of the Good Friday meeting reached the ears of Roger Nowell, the local magistrate. He gave orders that every single person who had attended the Good Friday meeting should be arrested immediately. When word filtered into the forest of these imminent arrests, two people who had attended the Good Friday meeting thought there's no way we're going to hang around, and that was Christopher Halgate and his wife Barbara. They escaped into the Forest of Pendle and made their way into West Yorkshire. But in doing so, they saved their lives. However, the ones that were successfully arrested were Jeanette Preston of Gisborne, West Yorkshire, Catherine Hewitt and Alice Gray of the town of Colne, Elizabeth Devise, James Devise and Jeanette Devise of Malkin Tower, and 3 other local people that were most unusual, really. A lady called Alice Nutter, who was a noblewoman, and 2 local farmers, John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son. They were all sent to Lancaster with the exception of the 2 Jeanettes. Jeanette Preston came from Gisborne, West Yorkshire, so therefore she was sent to the city of York to be tried by the York City magistrates. Her husband went with her, villagers went with her, and they begged for her release. However, the judges said, "I'm sorry, King James has signed her death warrant. She was dead before she even arrived here." She was found guilty of the murder of Thomas Lister of Gisborne. She'd been nursing him. He had died. She wrapped his body in a clean white sheet ready for burial. And before the burial took place, she touched the sheeting and some fresh blood came for the sheet. This was classed as witchcraft. And she became the very first of the Pendle Witches to be executed in the city of York on the 28th of July, 1612. The other Jeanette, the little girl that lived at Malkin Tower, she was sent to live with the local magistrate, Roger Nowell. And for the very first time in her life, she had 3 meals a day, nice clothes to wear, and also a lovely warm bed to sleep in. She had no idea, but she was going to play a very, very important role in the prosecution of her entire family and everyone associated with the Pendle Witch trials.
Oh.
Dun, dun, dun.
The politics actually behind all of this, and we're not talking like politics on a political level. We're talking like village politics that goes on, turning person against person, trying to save people, things that you'll do to save your family. All those sort of things are starting to play out now, and taking that little girl and putting her in a family home, a lifestyle she's never had before. It's a very political move, isn't it, really?
Very much so, Kerry, very, very much so. This is where the Spielberg story comes in, because we're looking at a real thriller here, because we've got these poor people that have all been arrested. They're waiting trial. And Roger Nowell, the local magistrate, of course, he's absolutely delighted. He's got all these people in the cells at Lancaster. He's got the little girl who's going to be the star witness. And he writes to King James personally, "Sir, I have witches waiting to be tried in the city of Lancaster." The king, of course, is delighted. Remember, he's paranoid about witchcraft. So therefore, he sends from the city of London 2 very, very high-ranking judges, James Altham and Edmund Bromley, and this young boy called Thomas Potts. And that's why we're here tonight, really, because he's going to write the book, The Wonderful Discovery. He's actually going to be the clerk court at the actual trials. When they arrive in Lancaster, they're met by Roger Nowell, the local magistrate, William Holden and John Bannister, 2 other magistrates. The jury consist just of men, because at that period of time, it was believed that women did not possess a brain, and it was believed that women were incapable of even organising anything, really. Total male chauvinism. So therefore, these women on trial are going to have no female support whatsoever. The trials began on the 17th of August, 1612, and Elizabeth Southern, commonly known as Demdike, that was her nickname. They called her Demdike. It was a rather cruel name that was given to her by the jury, because they really were quite nasty in those days, really. And she died before the trials began. However, she did admit to the murder of Richard Assheton, the child of Richard Baldwin, and of Henry Mitten of Roughlee by making these clay pictures. And as it happens, young Jeanette Device was picked up and put on top of the desk, and so the jury could see her. And she told the jury how she'd seen these dogs arrive called Tib, Ball, Fancy and Dandy, how she'd seen these clay pictures fashioned, and how these dogs had suckled from the flesh of her grandmother and indeed Anne Whittle and indeed Anne Redfern, and how they'd gone to Newchurch Cemetery and taken teeth and hair off corpses and actually used them to make the clay pictures. The conditions at Lancaster must have been absolutely terrible. The first person brought up from the cells was the 85-year-old Anne Whittle, commonly known as Bessie Chattox. That was again another nickname given to her because apparently she was so scared her teeth were chattering away. Thomas Potts, in his book The Wonderful Discovery, mentions that she was literally a skeleton. Literally a skeleton. She'd been lying in her own waste. She'd seen daylight for the very, very first time. However, she freely admitted to the murder of Robert Nutter, Anne Nutter, John Moore, Hugh Moore and John Devise by making the clay pictures and freely cursing them. She begged that her daughter Anne Redfern could be released because she had confessed these murders. However, her daughter was then brought up, Anne Redfern, and she was found guilty of the murder of Christopher Nutter. It's said that Christopher Nutter had tried to basically rape Anne, and Anne had refused his advances and actually escaped. And Christopher Nutter had indeed complained about this and said that that he had actually cursed him, that she had actually cursed him. This was mentioned before he died, but the jury believed that Anne Redfern was actually guilty of the murder of Christopher Nutter. Catherine Hewitt, she came from the town of Combe. She was brought in next, and she admitted to the murder of Anne Foles. She actually freely admitted to witchcraft. Then came the mother of James, Alison and Jeanette, called Elizabeth Devise. She was in a terrible state of health. She had one eye that looked up, the other eye that looked down. She had facial warts and she looked like a typical fairy tale witch. Again, she admitted to the murder of John Robinson, James Robinson and Henry Mitten. She freely admitted to this. Before she confessed, her little daughter was put on top of the desk once again. That was Jeanette Devise. And she noticed how much weight Jeanette had put on. And Jeanette told everyone how she'd seen her own mother fashion these clay pictures. Her mother, Elizabeth, shouted, "Stop it, Jeanette. You don't know what you're saying. Have my mother removed from the court, sir. She's upsetting me." And her mother was taken down. But she freely admitted to the murders of these three people. The last person to be brought up was indeed James Devise. Now, James was classed really as a bit of a dimwit. He was about 18 years of age. The jury once again mentioned that he looked like he'd been treated very, very badly. He was in such a bad state of health that two warders had to stand by either side of him to actually stop him from fainting. And the jury wondered whether the lad had been tortured or not, really. However, he freely admitted to the murder of Anne Townley, John Hargreaves, Blaise Hargreaves, and John Duckworth by making the clay pictures and having this dog called Ball that was the devil in disguise that actually helped him. Now, this is where the story does take a very, very unusual twist. In the court that day was John and Jane Bulcock, a mother and son, hard-working farmers from the village of Blackow in the centre of the Pendle region. And with them was this very, very elegant lady of the name of Alice Nutter. Alice lived at Roughlee Hall. She was a noble woman. Now, all three of them, John and Jane and Alice, had gone to see Roger Nowell. Nothing to do with witchcraft whatsoever, but to do with land disputes. They were losing land. Fencing was being pushed back. Stone walls were being destroyed. Cattle was disappearing, and so was sheep. And they went to see the local magistrate to complain. He'd done nothing about it. Now, in 1612, women were not allowed any privileges whatsoever. They weren't even allowed to, as I mentioned before, possess a brain. Now, Alice came from Roughly Hall, this gorgeous, gorgeous building, which is still there to this very, very day. She had a husband called Miles, and she said to Miles, look, we are losing land, we are losing cattle and sheep. You need to go and see Roger Nowell once again. I'm too scared. Well, Alice said, I'm going to go to the city of Lancaster and see the senior magistrates. You can imagine, as a woman, this took incredible bravery. She walked into a court session in the city of Lancaster to the words of, it's a woman! A woman! Get her out! A woman! She grabbed hold of furniture. The wardens tugged and tugged, but she would not let go. And the judge said, well, let her have her say. In one day, she won all her land disputes fairly and squarely. But in doing so, as she left that day, she had annoyed one man. That man was indeed Roger Nowell. He was fuming. How dare this woman go over my head? She's embarrassed me, along with John and Jane Bullcock. They've all embarrassed me. I need to get rid of them. How can I do that? Ah, he had a trump card up his sleeve. The little girl, Jeanette Devise. For the second time that morning, he picked her up and put her on top of a desk and said, Jeanette, these three people here, John and Jane Bullcock, Alice Nutter, were they at your home, Malkin Tower, on Good Friday in the Forest of Pendle? They were, sir. A look of shock and horror came across John and Jane's face and Alice's face as they realised the jury, on the evidence of this little girl, were finding them guilty of witchcraft. The three of them made pleas of not guilty. But in the case of John and Jane, were found guilty of the murder of Jean Mead of Harrogate, West Yorkshire, by turning this girl completely insane. In the case of Alice Nutter, she was found guilty of aiding Elizabeth Southern and indeed Alison Device in the murder of Henry Mitten of Roughly, because he wouldn't give her a penny. In court, Alice laughed, Sir, I don't need to beg. I'm a woman of wealth. I don't even know these people. However, the jury believed the little girl was telling the truth, and they were found guilty of attending the Good Friday meeting, but also of witchcraft. They were then sent to the gallows. And my grandmother told me this because her great-grandmother and her great-great-grandmother mentioned this as well, that as Alice Nutter made her way to the pillory, this horrible place of execution, she and the rest of them had to stand on these trestles with ropes round their necks, and she very bravely turned and saw Roger Nowell standing there in the crowd beneath. This huge crowd came to watch the execution. He was holding the hand of the little girl, Jeanette Devise, and she bravely shouted, I shall haunt you for the rest of your life. Then the stools were kicked out from underneath them. These poor people did not hang, they strangled to death. Watching that day was the little girl, Jeanette Devise. She saw her entire family die, the inhabitants of Colne die, the three landowners die. And when they stopped twitching, Nowell said, Goodbye. What do you mean, sir, goodbye? Surely I'm going back to that lovely house of yours, sir. Goodbye. He'd used her. She made the long journey back towards the little cottage in the Forest of Pendle, must have sat down in the corner of that cottage and realised that her evidence had claimed the life of her entire family, and she'd been used. The following morning, the two circuit judges, James Altham and Edmund Bromley, were both knighted, and 2 weeks later Roger Nowell was also knighted and made the High Sheriff of Lancashire. Thomas Potts, the clerk to the courts, wrote his book in 1613, The Wonderful Discovery, which earned him a fortune. To this very, very day, as you make your way to Pendle Hill, when the snow comes down, the last piece of snow to melt is always in the perfect shape of a white witch. And if you go to Google search and put the White Witch of Pendle, you'll see it clearly. It's happened on many, many occasions. It's almost as if I believe Alice Nutter's spirit is still calling out for justice, because that poor woman died nothing to do with witchcraft, but to do with basically male chauvinism that claimed her life, because in those days she had a brain and sadly she knew how to use it.
Oh, my goodness. Is it, well, where do you go with that? I mean, why do you think they, why do you think they admitted to it? I mean, and I appreciate that It wasn't a quick process. When you get put in a prison back in those days, you was left there to languish until, but travelling, it was on horseback, so it'd take weeks sometimes for the right people in the right place for the courts to convene. So you're starved, you lived in filth, all of those kind of things. So mentally, you're stricken as much as physically. So admitting it is not going to change anything. You're going to die. You're going to be you're going to be found guilty if you got to that stage. It's very few people were acquitted of witchcraft once they got to that, weren't they?
Very much so, Kerry. We've got to rely entirely on Thomas Potts's book. Of course, when he wrote it, he'd be under a lot of duress because there's no way he could criticise the King of England. Absolutely no way at all, really. But you've got to look at the jury. It was a male jury. For all we know, the evidence against these people could have been fabricated. We really don't know. We do know that in the case of Demdike, Shattuck's, Catherine Hewitt, Elizabeth Device, Anne Redfern, James Device, these people were of very, very low intelligence. They were peasants living in the forest of Pendle. And for all we know, they could have just been deliberately rounded up as a way of Roger Nowell wishing to actually curry favour with the King of England. We shall never, ever know. It's one of those stories which is still shrouded in mystery. And then, of course, we've got Alice Nutter, John and Jane, who made pleas of not guilty. And they'd obviously upset the local magistrate as well, really. We do know that young Jeanette Device, she survived because 3 years later, she was actually re-arrested. A young boy called Edmund Robinson said he'd been walking through the forest of Pendle and seen her commit acts of witchcraft. Of course, with her family reputation, this was taken very, very seriously. And she was immediately arrested and sent to Lancaster City Castle. The poor girl was stripped naked, looked at by surgeons and doctors, then sent down to London to look for marks on her body, witching marks, if you will. Back up to Lancaster, down to London, and after 3 long years of travelling up and down the country, this young boy Robinson said, actually, I made it all up. I didn't see her do anything. So you could say that witchcraft or this superstition surrounding it absolutely destroyed that poor girl's life. But I must say, there's one part of section of the story I've forgotten, Kerry, to mention, which is quite important, really. In the cell next door to the Pendle Witches were 3 young ladies, Jane Southworth, Ellen, and Jane Brearley. The Brearley sisters were indeed twin sisters, 20 years of age, and so was Jane Southworth. Now, Jane came from Samlesbury Hall, this gorgeous, gorgeous Tudor building, some 6 miles from the forest of Pendle. And they're enjoying a meal when the King's Commission arrived at Samlesbury Hall and shouted, "In the name of the King, we arrest you for witchcraft." The 3 of them were sent to Lancaster and put in the cell next to the Pendle Witches. They never heard them, they never saw the Pendle Witches, but they were tried on the same day. And on the 20th of August, 1612, Jane heard this huge roar outside her cell window, and she climbed the shoulders of 2 friends, the Brearley sisters, and looked out of the iron grille. There she saw in the distance the Pendle Witch standing on the trestles, and she watched in horror as someone was kicking the trestles out from underneath them. She then heard this huge roar as they were swinging freely in their last minutes of life. She then heard the sound of footsteps that got louder and louder. A key was placed in her cell door. The cell door was opened, and there was Mr. Thomas Cavell, the head jailer of Lancaster City Castle. "Right, you 3. We just dealt with that lot. It's your turn next. Follow me." You can imagine the horror, the fear, the paranoia, the terrible fright that Jane had just seen as a 20-year-old girl. This was quite frightening. She made her way with the 2 Brearley sisters along the twisting staircase and into the same courts that had just dispatched the Pendle Witches in front of James Altham, Edmund Bromley, Thomas Potts, Roger Nowell, William Holden and John Bannister, and the same all-male jury. They were in no mood for clemency whatsoever, and they used another child witness, a little girl called Gracie Sowerberts. Gracie was 7 years old. She was a head gardener's daughter from Salisbury Hall. She was brought into the courts there, picked up and put on top of a desk just like young Jeanette had been. And James Olsen said, "Right, young lady, read out your testimony against these 3 witches." "I will, sir. I was walking along the banks of the River Ribble, sir. I saw Jane South and the 2 Brayley sisters swimming in the river, sir. I then saw these unusual dogs. I've never seen the breed before, sir. Huge heads, long backs, long tails. They jumped into the river, sir. They materialised into human beings, slightly dark-skinned human beings, sir. They picked up all 3 women. They danced in a circle. They paired off for a meal. I then watched in the distance, sir, as fraternisation was taking place with these demonic spectres. On the 2nd day, Ellen Brayley came to see me, sir. She changed from a woman into a dog, sir, and she tried to suffocate me, sir, but I escaped, sir. On the 2nd day, I was met by the 3 of them again, sir, Jane Southworth and the 2 Brayley sisters. They said, 'Gracie, do you fancy a bit of fun?' 'What do you mean, fun?' 'Well, a little boy's just been born at Sarsby Hall called Thomas Walshman. We'd like to drink his blood.' 'No, no, no,' said Gracie. James Olsen picked up the gavel. 'Right, we find you guilty.' Before the gavel came down, his companion Bromley said, No, let her finish her testimony.' 'Sir, in the dead of night, they went to Sarsby Hall, sir. They went to the long gallery and picked up the little boy, sir, who was sleeping, sir. They pricked his stomach, and over 4 nights they consumed his blood, sir. The little boy died and was interned at Samlesbury Church. In the dead of night, sir, they went back. They dug up the coffin. They took the baby out of the coffin. They boiled the baby's flesh. They ate the flesh and kept some body ointments that would enable them to change shape, sir.' That's it. James Olsen picked up the gavel. 'Right, we do find you guilty.' Before the gavel came down, Jane Southworth shouted, 'Sir, I beg of you, sir, to cross-examine this young girl, sir. She has been manipulated by a Catholic priest hiding at Sarsby Hall as we speak, sir.' Just that one word, Catholicism, made the judges sit back. 'You're an Anglican, you say?' 'Yes, sir. I married into the Southworth family, so they've never liked me, sir, because of my Anglican views, sir. Please cross-examine her, sir. She's been manipulated by a Catholic priest.' They took Gracie next door. As you can imagine, Jane and the 2 sisters were on tenterhooks. Would they live? Would they hang? You can imagine the paranoia, the fear that must have gone through the 3 of them. After what seemed like an eternity, in came James Olsen, Edmund Bromley, Thomas Potts, Roger Noel, William Holden and John Bannister, and the court was reassembled. James Olsen stood up. 'In the light of new evidence, we find you, James Southworth, Eugene and Ellen Brayley, innocent of the crimes against you. You're free to go.' The 3 of them hugged each other. They jumped for joy. As they left Lancaster, they turned and they saw the pillory behind them. They saw the Pendle Witches hanging and blowing in the wind. At the end of the pillory, they saw 3 empty nooses. And Jane realised she had not only saved her life, but the lives of her 2 best friends as well. But in many ways, our story is just beginning. Because 200 years later, in the little village of Worley near Clitheroe, 2 local doctors sat round a glowing fire in a beautiful old inn called the Worley Arms. They had a glass of punch in each hand, they'd just had a warm meal, and they discussed the Pendle Witch story and the Sarsby Hall Witch story. And Dr. Whittaker said to Dr. Dawson, 'I believe young Grace Sarbets was telling the truth.' 'How?' said his companion. 'Well, the way she described those dogs in the River Ribble sounded a bit like Tib, Ball and Fancy to me. I remember she wouldn't be at the courts that day, so she had an eyewitness account. But most importantly, let's get permission to exhume the Walshman grave.' They wrote to York Minster. York Minster dispatched the Reverend John Franks, and he arrived at Sarsby Church, and he said, 'Gentlemen, we shall exhume this coffin, but under Church of England regulations.' They had the grave records, and they started to dig, and just 2 feet beneath the surface, they found a lozenge-shaped child's coffin from the 1612 period. Under Church of England jurisdiction, it was opened and was found to contain absolutely nothing. Who knows? Young Grace may just have been telling the truth. We shall never, ever know.
There you go.
Oh,
Talk about edge of your seat.
I know. Oh my God. Well, this is what, guys. This is ghost walking. Go get a ghost walk. When you get someone like Simon doing a walk, just listening to it, just on the radio, without actually being there, is just spellbinding.
Yeah.
So you can imagine what it would be like actually in the places that this this happened. Oh my God, I'm speechless. Love a good story. But this is historical fact, isn't it? You've researched this, yeah?
Oh, very, very much so. Well, the only window we have, Kerry, is this book by Thomas Potts. That's the only window. I mean, over the years, of course, many authors have mixed fiction with non-fiction. But Potts's book is the only account. But even reading that, because he can't in any way upset the King of England, he's got to go on the king's side. The jury probably did as well, actually. But the jury believed that these two little girls, in the case of the Pendle Witches, Jeanette Device, and Gracie Salisbury Witches, they believed a child could not be manipulated, and that's why they were used. And the same thing happened at Salem in Boston many years later, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we all know the tragedies that occurred there.
Yeah.
And it was tragic. I mean, when you actually think about it, the cold bones of it, it is horrendous how people treated each other. You know, so many themes run through this. You've got the religious, theme going through this. You've got land disputes going into this. You've got man against woman going through like that attitude. You've got so much going on. Within this, Richard,
very
sorry.
Much so,
yeah, because you must be living on tenterhooks. Because as soon as somebody lights that spark within that community, it can just sweep through it like wildfire.
Very, very much so. What we did do in 2012, I got together with Pendle Borough Council, the local authority, Visit England and Marketing Lancashire, and I met a lovely lady called Ruth who runs Marketing Lancashire. We got together and we thought we need to do something for Alice. And after 400 years, we got together and we got some money for the lottery people. And we unveiled a statue to Alice in her village of Roughly. Her back is facing Lancaster. She's in chains, and the artist did a fantastic job in her face. It's a look of total innocence. And Alice Nutter's statue has become very much a symbol of female rights. And it doesn't matter what time of year you go into the village of Roughly, you will find always around the statue are bunches of flowers. And I'll put Alice in the same league as Grace Darling, the fantastic Edith Cavell, the brilliant Emmeline Pankhurst, because Alice lost her life not because she was a witch, but because she was a woman who used her brain. And she was basically murdered by the British government. That's the only way I can describe it, really.
Yeah, horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Now, on your ghost walks, we asked this to Mackenzie earlier, have you had any weird and wonderful happenings, paranormal occurrences that happen?
Oh, yes, let's get down to this, yeah.
Right, well, on the actual ghost walks, they haven't, but on Pendle Hill, a most unusual event did take place. Remember, I'm a tour guide that loves ghost stories, and I'm a collector of ghost stories. I'm not actually a paranormal investigator, but I do a lot of work with groups. One's called Spooktacular, another's called Dusk Till Dawn, and a marvellous group from Nottingham called Haunted Happenings. And they do book me for the for Pendle tours. But what we'll do, we'll do the story for the daytime, and at night time we'll go to the area called Malkin Tower. And they bring their mediums with them that are very, very good, extremely good. One's a chap called Kevin Bruff, who's absolutely excellent. And we also have Lindsay from Spooktacular. She's brilliant as well, really. But with the Haunted Happenings, they brought tables with them for a thing called table tipping. And what was quite amazing, we got to Malkin Tower, they got the tables out, pitch black, of course, and we had torchlight with us, but this human tooth came from nowhere and bounced off one of the tables. And I thought, oh, someone's lost a tooth. with my torch, I went under the table and found the tooth. It was indeed a child's milk tooth. And we asked if there was anyone who'd lost a tooth. No. Anyone who'd brought a milk tooth. No. It was definitely a child's milk tooth. It bounced off the table. How, why, I don't know. But what has also happened at this place called Malkin Tower is on some occasions this rather gorgeous aroma comes from nowhere. A beautiful, beautiful aroma. It's like walking into a flower shop. And this can take place in January and December when there's no flora and fauna around. But there's definitely an atmosphere there. There's definitely an atmosphere.
Definitely one to visit, I say. Now, Haunted Happenings actually do a whole weekend. So if you want to book on that, I think they're starting to reschedule their events.
Yes, they are indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, so go check that weekend out. The cost is actually a phenomenal cost. It's fantastic for what you get for the weekend. And you stay at an amazing hotel. They lay on all the food and the ghost walk and the paranormal investigation side. They do it all for you. Lay on all the travel for the entire area. Well worth it. So go check that out. Haunted Happenings. Right, Simon, let's get back to your walks and talks.
Sure.
You must have stuff coming up again now. The world started, or the country, should I say, starting to open up. You're starting on Monday, you were saying before we went live.
Yes, I've got a guided tour on Monday. I'll meet a group at 3:30 in the afternoon, and it'd be just so nice to get back to work again, really. And then I've got a Pendle Witch tour on Thursday, which is going to be very nice as well. That's again for a small group. We still have to social distance, but because we're outside. And what I tend to do is I break the story into like 4 segments. So we visit each of the villages, and I tell a segment from each village to make up the whole story, really. But I am looking forward to it. But I'm also, one thing I have done, Kerry, whilst we've had this lockdown, is I've had many good conversations with quite a few people on the telephone and through the internet, and picked up a lot more gorgeous stories. And one thing I do love about my work is you don't run out of material. And just occasionally I do like PowerPoint shows at schools and universities, etc. And what is so nice is to have like a picture in the background, and then you talk about the story. And I'm always looking for more stories, but what I love about the human brain is it can store a lot of stuff up there. It's great, really.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And it's great that you can get out and about and start doing the work that you do and telling these stories again, because there's nothing better than hearing a ghost story. That's kind of one of the reasons we all got into the field in the first place, right?
Very much so. When I go to schools, Kerry, some of the teachers say, I wish we could get the same attention with maths and English. Yeah.
Maybe they should weave it into a story. They might get the attention then, make it a bit more interesting. Come on now.
Exactly. You know, you walk into a house with 3 ghosts and you bring 2 with you. How many have you got? There you go. There's your math lesson.
Yes.
Maybe they should employ these storytelling techniques that are being lost because people are going too much, you know, the youth of today are very much gadgetified. These storytelling techniques are so important to embrace and engage the imagination and that side of things.
Yes.
Our brain is a tool that we need to use, and it is sort of like we rely too much on technology, which has been great through the lockdown, but we also need to show the youth that this is an integral part of their life as well, through people that tell stories who have that skill. We have been absolutely transfixed through this show with Simon's storytelling. You can imagine what it would be like actually being there with him on one of these ghost walks. You know, where else are you doing them? I mean, I know you predominantly do Pendle, but you do other areas as well. Have you got any books for there?
Yeah, one thing I really love actually is the coach tours. I'll meet coaches from all over Great Britain. They'll stay in hotels in Lancashire, Yorkshire and Cumbria. Drive to the hotel, climb in the coach and get the microphone, sit in the front seat there. And one tour I really love is called Haunted Inns, where you visit really, really ancient public houses. And people will have a drink in each one of them. And it's amazing. We don't really have like a rowdy mob or anything, because people will have a drink, but they just love the stories associated with the inns. And you'll find some of our ancient inns have got ghosts, murders, and mysteries, and you bring them all to life, really.
Yeah,
it's like
most
when
definitely.
I used to do a ghost walk around Canewdon, and Canewdon in Essex is very orientated around the witches. And yeah, I used to do a couple of pubs on the route.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah,
Were they
nice
all
break.
the oldest inns in the country, though? The most haunted inns in the country? Because a lot of inns these days have that title now, don't they?
Oh, yes, yeah. I mean, I just love these. I mean, Mackenzie, God bless her, when she does a ghost walk, she'll go past some gorgeous old inns. And the stories in York are, from Dick Turpin to the Roman soldiers in the cellar there. I mean, she's got a real dream location there, really. And I've been on Mackenzie's tours as well, and she does paint a fantastic picture. She really does.
Guys, I would suggest that as the country starts to open up, one thing you can do is open air ghost walks. I would recommend them no matter what city you're in, you're going to find one. And definitely find a good storyteller, because it makes so much difference and it brings history to life. Those stories of people that lived and breathed and had experiences, it brings it to life for you. Go check them out. These guys have been on their knees through lockdown. They can't wait to get out and do their ghost walks for you. Simon being fantastic, Mackenzie being another one who's fantastic. But like I say, every single city will have somebody who does a ghost walk, right, Simon?
Very true, Kerry. I must say, John Hippesley, he runs the Canterbury Ghost Walks in Kent, and he's an exceptionally good storyteller. And John's tours are well worth going on because, again, he does paint a picture in the imagination and loves the city of Canterbury with all his heart as well.
And we are so blessed in the UK. All of our cities have such a wealth of history. Well, our whole country has a wealth of history surrounding us. And this is one thing we can do safely, COVID regs safe. You're out in the fresh air, listening to ghost stories in fantastic settings, in the places they took place. This is one thing that needs to be done definitely this year. You know, let's get out and support those ghost walk people, because seriously, there is nothing better. There really isn't. I love them. Every time I go on holiday or go away for a weekend break, I'm searching out ghost walks. Isle of Wight, I have been on one Isle of Wight. I've done the Canterbury one. I've done York. I've done London. Oh, my God, they're brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We've actually come to the end of the show.
Wow. God. Flies by so much.
Simon, where can they find you to book you?
Right, Kerry. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I've got a brand new website, which is full of information, and that is simply www.tophattoursInfo. That's Top Hat Tours Info. I also have on YouTube a whole array of stories called Simon Entwistle's Tales from the Graves.
Ooh.
Oh, go subscribe, check him out on the socials, get booking on those tours around the country, everybody, because this is definitely the way forward for this year, I feel. More than maybe next year we'll be able to do more inside things, but this year I definitely suggest in the summer do this sort of thing. This is just the way to go. We've come to the end of the show, guys. Have we got any news?
I don't know. I'm still on the edge of my seat.
I know, right, Richard?
Yeah.
No, it was a fascinating show. Really enjoyed today.
Although people can still buy our book, it's still available. You can go to paranormalconcept.com and find it under publications.
You can, and read all our up-to-date blogs on there as well that we write on a regular basis.
I've got to write one now, haven't I? Oh, yeah.
Yes. Paul's turn. Paul's up next.
Yeah, my turn next.
Following on from the Wayland Smith story I wove last week.
Yeah.
Which direction is he going to take it?
Go into The Simpsons.
No. I'm vetoing that idea. On that note, thank you so much, Simon. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Kerry, it's my pleasure to be with you once again, and also with Richard and Paul as well, of course.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. I've loved doing this show. On that note, we've got to say goodbye because we're running over now. Say good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Good night, folks.